Hey everybody, welcome to the Dollar Bin Bandits, the only podcast with old friends discussing old comics and the people that created them. I'm Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in crime, Orrin Phillips
Hey, everybody.
and Mike Farah.
Howdy, howdy.
So, if it's Wednesday, you're hearing our latest episode. It's also comic book day, and some might refer to it as hump day. But I call it the halfway point of the week where you get to break it up with our latest episode, which we will be talking to comic book artist Joe Staton. Now, he has done a lot of work in the comic book industry. I can't express a lot enough. He's covered Charlton comics. He worked on Green Lantern Corps. So you know I had fun talking to him. Orrin went crazy talking to him. Why don't you explain it, Orrin?
To me, it was like getting to talk to Elvis. I thought he was the coolest guy who's walked the earth. The man was at Charlton. He had great stories to tell. I'm so curious about Charlton. He's worked on so many different books, and you couldn't ask for a nicer guy. You'll see in this, he shows us some of his original art. Joe and I, when we were done with it, we're like, if anyone ever messes with Joe Staton, man, they better come through us first because that's our guy. Like that, we became very protective of Joe Staton, and what a wonderful evening it was to talk to him.
I was excited by the excitement that was coming through the computer as I was listening to this episode. All he had to say about Charlton, Orrin was digging deep on that, and Joe on Green Lantern. And I was, particularly interested in the work he did at First Comics with Badger, Nexus, all those great characters. So another great one in the books, guys. So let's go to it now and stop delaying. This is Joe Staton.
I just have to admit that I've been excited for this interview for weeks now, just coming up with questions because I'm fascinated with Charlton Comics. I know you worked there, and so I just have to ask, how'd you start with Charlton? What was the process?
Oh, well, would you like my origin story?
I'd love it.
Well, I had just gotten married in Brooklyn, and my wife and I were headed to Connecticut to Mystic for a very short honeymoon. She was a teacher, and she could take just a little bit of time off from work, and we couldn't afford to go very far anyway. And between Brooklyn and Mystic was Charlton, which was in Derby, Connecticut. And I, took a chance, had my samples with me, and we stopped there. I had called up earlier and talked to Sal Gentili. So I had an appointment. So we went in to talk to Sal, and Sal was the editor, and George Wildman was his assistant editor, and they talked to us, and I left there with some work, a ghost story for Ghost Manor. Charlton did a lot of, not terribly scary, but kind of cool ghost stories. So that's how I got my first continuing work in comics. I'd actually done like a couple of stories for Warren, and I guess that was really my first comics, my first work in comics. But the stuff that lasted, that I count as my start, was at Charlton, and they kept on sending me work.
So there was no office to work in there? You would send things up to them, or did they have like a bullpen and stuff?
They had a building, and you could work there, but I was in Brooklyn and they were in Connecticut. So I got up there occasionally, but not routinely. So normal, and it was not so good sending things in those days. It was before FedEx, and it wasn't. A couple of times I sat on the stoop in Brooklyn waiting for the mail truck to catch them, make sure that I got something in and something went out. So it was a little different in those days. But, yeah. So at some point, Charlton had an office in New York, so you could turn in work there. But I think that had shut down by the time I was working for them.
Gotcha. And what was your impression of the operation and the quality of the comics and the environment?
Well, everybody knew Charlton was the bottom of the barrel. And the printing was terrible, and the books themselves were not the top of the line. So, but I didn't care. I just I wanted to draw comics, and here I was drawing comics.
I said that they had such a roster of talent, though, that made their way through. Like yourself, Steve Ditko, John Byrne. I mean, the lists go on and on and on. And I know Ditko had a pretty long run there too.
Yeah, he would come and go. They always had a home for him. If he would get annoyed with somebody, he would come back to Charlton for a while and do some ghost stories and do some covers. And he just they were always happy to see him come back for a while. And far I'm concerned, it did really great stories for them. I guess it was in the 50s, Mysterious Traveler and Tales of the Unexpected. Something like that. But really, really nice, scary stuff back then.
Now, it was your first job. Did they give you any artistic help? Did they critique your work at all, or was it pretty much what you sent in is what they ran?
Well, they didn't actually do much editing. When I was in the offices, they gave me some art they had sitting around there. There was a Ditko ghost story. They gave me that. They gave me a Jim Aparo story that he'd done with Denny O'Neil, and a Pete Morisi Western for some reason. And I don't know, just odd things they had sitting around. Here, take this, look at this. It's yours. Just, try to make it look something like this. And let's see, what else? The most interesting, I guess the disco stuff, I guess, was most interesting. But also couple of the pages they gave me was when Jose Luis Garcia Lopez was still working in South America, or maybe he was in Spain at that time, but he was actually working for Charlton before anybody knew who he was or what he was doing. But he was doing like this wonderful art for their romance books. George and Sal said they didn't think my stuff was refined enough for the Charlton for the romance books, but I'd be fine for the ghost stories. So, and I did do a couple of romances, but mostly horror, ghost stories, and that sort of thing. So that was fine with me.
I'd say, did you enjoy the ghost stories? I mean, if you had to choose, a genre to draw at the time, what would you have picked?
I think that would have been what I would be most happy with.
Yeah. Now,
always happy with kind of the dark, moody sort of stuff.
Right. Now, did you work pretty well, or did you work closely with the writers at all, or you were just kind of given an outline of what to draw, and then they just sort of put in a story around it?
It was always a complete plot, a complete script.
Okay.
I mentioned Joe Gill was like their staff writer, and Joe, I think he kind of went into a Zen state. He would come sit in front of the typewriter, and he'd write, and there was like eight-page stories. There's an 8-page story, and then he'd start writing another 8-page story, and it might be romance, it might be war, it might be horror stories, and he'd put them in a stack, and then if somebody was there to pick it up and take it home, well, that was cool. Otherwise, George would pack them up and send them out to whoever needed to draw them. And there was one time I was up there, and Joe Gill was doing a bunch of stories, and they handed me a couple of stories to take with me, and I forget what the story was, but I told Joe, Joe Gill, that I really like this story. He shouldn't be surprised, but I did like that story quite a bit. He had no idea. He didn't remember writing it. It had just happened. He sat in front of the typewriter, and the story happened.
Wow.
But it was whatever it was a good story, and I am sure I enjoyed drawing it.
I assume so, yeah. Did you ink your own work there too, or did they have people who did that?
Mostly I inked my own stuff.
Okay.
I think Charlie Nicholas actually inked my first story.
Okay.
And occasionally somebody else would. Occasionally Sal Gentili would ink some of my stuff.
Okay.
But mostly I inked my own stuff.
Was it frustrating as an artist, though, knowing what you had drawn? And I know the printing quality wasn't as great, and see kind of the washed out, stuff that would come out in the books. Was that frustrating to you at all?
It was a little a sense of futility. When I eventually I got a regular book called Primus that was based on a TV show about a skin diver, and I wasn't really familiar with how they handled the coloring so much yet, and I had all kinds of fish, underwater fish, and I wrote extensive notes on what colors the fish were. So when they were printed, they were all green. They were like a couple of different shades of green, but whatever was underwater was green. So I learned. I count for it.
Now, that's one thing I wanted to ask you. I'm so glad you brought that up. Was Charlton seemed to get the licenses for a lot of TV shows? Like there was Bionic Man, I think Bionic Woman. What you mentioned, I think Emergency had a little run. Yeah. How are they able to get these licenses for these shows? Is because they went with the low ball offer, and the people took it?
That was it. The animated stuff, a lot of that, and they were just able to keep the books in print longer than anybody else because they didn't have to make they didn't have that much expense on it. They didn't have to a whole lot of investment into it, so they could pick up the licenses and just keep them going without a lot of loss.
How many different titles do you think you worked on while you were there?
Oh my! Well, lots of ghost stories. Primus, Eman, $6 Million Man. I did some covers for Emergency, Space 1999. I did and Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch, or the animated. It must have been like 20 or 30 titles.
Wow.
Of course, you couldn't tell. The ghost stories did have different hosts, so that you could tell them apart that way.
Right.
That Space 1999 looked really good. I was looking at that actually earlier today, and because they have it on eBay if you want it. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
The artwork was fantastic. And I didn't mean to step on your question, Oren, but I just was curious. Artistically, do you have any influences, or do you pull from anywhere when you're creating?
Oh, from all over, basically. Okay. Anything I've ever seen. I called Chester Gould my first influence because I could read the Dick Tracy strips before I could read, so I didn't have to follow anybody talking. I just saw the pictures, and Al Camp, Flash Gordon stuff, the newspaper stuff, and I guess a lot of my basic influence are the Dell westerns. I loved. I didn't know his name, of course, but I loved Alberto Giolitti's western stuff, The Lone Ranger, and then I eventually came to the superhero stuff, Superboy. I think I learned to read with Superboy. So.
Now, when you're creating based upon whatever the subject matter may be, whether it's haunted ghost stories or space stuff or superhero stuff, are you given any direction as to the style, or do they know you as an artist at this point and they're like, okay, just this is what we're doing, do your thing?
At Charlton, you mean?
Well, in general, really. I don't mean to jump around. I know we want to stick to Charlton right now, but it just from an artistic point of view, is there any, are you just told a little bit more of this, less of that type of thing, or just do it?
It varies a lot. Okay. Sometimes they tell me that I should, there was a time everybody had to look like Neil Adams, and I never quite got the hang there. But mostly people after a while knew what I did. Give me some science fiction stuff and I'd be fine. Give me a detective, So I'm, people would know, and that I was kind of cartoony, and there was somebody. I think Mike Carlin was giving me an animated Superman annual at one point, and they were looking who can draw this cartoony annual, and somebody's told Mike, "Oh, Joe can draw it. He can't help it. That's how he draws." So, people after a while they knew there were certain things that I would. Do a better job on and enjoy, and sometimes I do things I didn't do a better job on it or enjoy, but it kind of worked out.
So how did E-Man come together? Because that's a little science fiction, it's a little superhero, and it really stood out in the line because of the art, I think.
Well, this was Sal Gentini was the original editor I was working for, and Sal retired and headed off to Florida to enjoy his rest. And George Wildman needed an assistant, so he hired one of Wally Wood's assistants, who was Nick Cuddy, was turned out to be a great guy, and I really meshed with Nick. If Joe Gill didn't actually know what he was writing at any given time, Nick had ideas. There was always something popping around in Nick's mind, and he understood characterization, and he loved science fiction. We did a lot of horror, not horror. Actually, it was more science fiction. Fantasy. Actually, right by your right arm, there's one of our best jobs.
Yep.
About the little kid who finds the giant egg.
Yep.
That is one of Nick's best stories, and I really love that story.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It's the kind of thing, a little bit of Bradbury, I guess, kind of a more humane feeling into Nick's stuff, and. When Nick signed on with Charlton, they kind of agreed to let him work on maybe a line of superhero books, but that fell through. That Charlton decided that would be too much of an investment. It was easier just keeping the ghost stories going, but they had given Nick the go ahead to start a superhero title of his own. So that was E-Man, and we had done enough stuff together by then that when Nick got the go ahead to do eman, he called me up and said that, he's got this energy type character, and would I like to do it with him? And I really did wanted to do some superhero stuff. I didn't have any real experience with it, but he sent me the script to the first eman, and I really liked it. My wife's still teaching at this point, and she came in from work, and I told her, I've got this script. It's about this energy creature who becomes a superhero, and he's got this girlfriend who's a stripper, and her name is Nova Kane. And that's the first time we said it out loud, and Hillary said, "Do you know what you just said?" So it's Nova Kane. So it was a good name, and it stuck, and that's how we got into that.
That's awesome. And how, from the E-Man that was printed on the comic to the idea that you had in your head, were there a lot of changes that you made, or was it pretty much what you imagined is what was on, in the book?
It was pretty much what I imagined. Nick, the way he wrote is the way he learned to write working for Wally Wood. They would do little, they would draw boxes on a sheet of typing paper and draw little kind of stick figures to tell you how it was breaking down, what was happening, and the copy would be printed in there in pencil. So so you could tell from Nick's Nick was an artist as well as a writer, and you could tell what he had done, that what he wanted there, and generally I would just follow what he had blocked out for me there.
Did you feel was it a nice sense of freedom to be able to create something on your own after doing a lot of these other things that you were sort of assigned?
It was, and because I hadn't done this sort of thing before, I was finding my way and could try anything in the book, and it was a lot of fun just finding my way there.
That's awesome. And I gotta ask, do you have any original art from Charlton still, or did they take a lot of that?
I actually have all of the
Oh,
all of the Charlton art.
wow,
Basically,
that's awesome.
So
You're right on.
Yeah, I'm just like, this is like the original stuff, man. Like, this is it. Oh man, oh man.
generally Charlton
Wipe your mouth, dude.
destroyed most of their art.
Yep.
Yeah.
They used it for like I don't know, pads and just shredded stuff. But Nick, since he was in the office, he salvaged the eman art for me, and when we there was a character, Michael Mauser was a detective, was in the eman stories, and he Nick salvaged the Mauser stories for me. So there's a kind of new incarnation of First Comics who a few years ago
Wow.
did a reprint. This is eman the early years, but this is all of the Charlton art, and there was a fanzine, a Charlton fanzine. I printed a few eman stories that weren't in the Charlton books, that were still around while after the book shut down.
Okay.
So those were all collected in this book. So this, I don't know, it's actually been several years now, maybe 10 years this was put out.
Pretty awesome.
So it's that and we scanned it all from the original art. So it was a good job.
How would you sum up your career at Charlton? Did you learn a lot, or was it more ups and downs?
So, everyone, it's that time of year again, the year of ghosts, goblins, graveyards, and of course, Yeet presents Halloween Spectacular, filled with the best stories from the best writers and the best artists coming together. It is the greatest independent comic anthology out there. You know you want it, you know you need it. Click the link below, join Patreon, get yourself the comic, $5 a month.
It was a lot of fun. I really learned an awful lot. They treated me very well. They did not pay me at all well, but I did not expect to be paid well, and that's not that wasn't why I was there. It was I had been thrown out at Marvel and DC, more or less politely or not so politely, but I hadn't got any work there, and nobody was interested, but Charlton gave me a shot and paid me enough that I was actually working, and I really did learn a lot there because I could try anything.
Right. I just think it's so cool that, speaking to someone who worked at Charlton, especially you, because of all this, you see, I have your works. It's so cool to see all this come together. It's awesome.
I was showing him my Green Lantern comics that I have of his too. So
yeah, we're fans, So
yeah. So on that note, how did you get to Marvel?
How I got to Marvel, I was working. I was still doing my Charlton stuff, and like I told you, I'd been thrown out at Marvel.
Right.
And then entirely out of the blue, for no reason that I could figure out, Roy Thomas called up one day and says, "Hey Joe, somebody needs to ink the Avengers. Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Okay, that sounds good." And he said, "That's good because we've already sent you the first issue." So
had you said no, that would have been really uncomfortable.
So suddenly I was inking the Avengers. Steve Englehart was writing it, and I got a good relationship with Steve, and that lasted. I worked with Steve off and on a lot, and I kept on inking the Avengers, I guess, for a little more than a year. Talking about Roy calling, I didn't know why Roy called, and I caught Roy at Heroes Con a couple of years ago. I says, "Roy, why did you call me to work for Marvel?" And he says, "I don't even remember calling you, Joe, but I guess we were desperate."
Oh, jeez.
So that was it.
Kind of should have said no. Well, really desperate?
Wow.
Take your Avengers.
Yeah, right. And of course, that was we were still shipping things back and forth in the mail. Hillary and I had moved up from Brooklyn up to the Hudson Valley by then, so they were mailing things back and forth. And again, that was waiting to see what showed up, and sometimes it did, and sometimes you had to wait quite a bit for it to show up.
Now, what was your feeling coming from Charlton to Marvel? I know you had been there previously, but as a comparison between the two, were you? Okay, maybe you weren't paid as much at Charlton, but it seems like everyone who works there has a real, attachment to it. Did you feel the same way towards Marvel, or is it just more or less like, hey, I'm Marvel, and this is a dream come true? Or
well, I was certainly pleased. It was a step up to be working for Marvel. It was getting better, and the books had more visibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of got pigeonholed kind of immediately as a certain kind of inker at Marvel.
Okay.
And at Charlton, I've gotten used to doing anything I wanted to do, and a little bit of everything different all the time. And it was very hard to get anything different from the particular kind of inking that I was doing. Marvel was perfectly happy to give me whatever inking I wanted to do, and I inked the Hulk for a couple of years, and it was hard to get anything that wasn't specifically that. Although we do have to say Archie Goodwin was at Marvel editing the black and white line. And Archie was always one of my partisans, and he found things for me to do in the black and white line. I did a bunch of the kung fu stuff, and I did one job I'm really pleased with. It's the life story of Bruce Lee.
Oh wow!
Which
awesome.
Which has just recently been reprinted in the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu collection. If you see that, give it a look. I'm very pleased with that job. And Archie was always willing to find something for me. But it didn't seem like it wasn't a long-term fit for me at Marvel. I don't think I was a Marvel sort of guy.
Why is that? Why would you say?
Why would I say? I think maybe when I was a kid, reading comics, it was, the old DC stuff. And Marvel didn't really come along till I was into my teens. So I never quite had the opportunity to understand Marvel as it was all coming together. I think so many people who work for Marvel kind of internalized that Marvel sort of look and everything as they were coming up, and I was kind of out of step with that. And also just a few times I'd go into Marvel, I never really found the people to hang out with. Other people say, Marvel was kind of home and that they would just fit right in, but I never really fit in at Marvel.
Understood. You're not the first person to say that. That's why I asked. I was curious, as to the reason why, but it seems like it's pretty much the same thing. But
oh, really?
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, I'm a DC guy. So. I mean, certainly not from the same, point of view as you, but certainly from a fan standpoint. So that being said, what drew you to DC?
Well, again, it was a call out of the blue.
Okay.
Paul Levitz was he was actually taking over DC. He was, the young whippersnapper with energy, and the DC's books were all completely off schedule. And I don't even remember what Paul's title was, but he was getting all the books kind of back on schedule. And at this point, there really weren't enough people in the business to draw all the books that were being done. That's why a lot of the books were being done in the Philippines. And but one thing DC was doing, actually, I guess Marvel was too, was having people who could draw very fast, just draw fast. As many books laid out as they could at a time. And they were hiring people who could ink and draw at the same time. So Paul had seen my stuff, and I don't know, somebody had recommended that I could do that. And he called me in, and they right off the bat, I was offered Karate Kid. And Paul said, "Well, do the layout, the finishes on the layouts for a while, and we'll get you into doing some penciling and a little bit of ink your own stuff or ink somebody else's stuff. Just there'll be possibilities for different things." So, and not to mention DC was going to pay me better than Marvel at the time, so that was good. And,
Yeah, that's always a good thing.
yeah.
What was your relationships like with some of the artists that you work with? I mean, what I mean by that, did you have like really, professionally close relationships in terms of, your artistic styles? Like, you preferred inking other people's, or they, in turn, like working with you, that type of stuff?
And it varied from one to the other. There were people there I really liked hanging out with. Actually, a lot of them were writers. Around Paul Levitz, you go in, hang out with Paul and Paul Kupperberg, and Marty Pascoe, and inker Bob Smith was one of my pals, and go in, hang out with him. There was always somebody to hang out with at DC, and we'd go to lunch, or going in, taking a job, and there were sometimes I couldn't figure out how DC actually published books because they were so busy going to lunch. But,
you have to feel that creativity somehow. I mean,
so it was fun for me. I kind of fit in at DC. I understood the old DC way of doing things, and they were coming into new things at that time too, bringing back the Justice Society, and just trying to build kind of their own stuff again, and it fit me better.
Doing some homework on you, it seems like you've done Green Lantern work a couple of times. I'm obviously a big fan. What did you enjoy most about those series? I think you did Green Lantern, of course, Guy Gardner, which I have a few of, and Green Lantern Corps as well.
Green Lantern Corps, yeah. Not to mention the New Guardians, which is a spinoff from.
Yes. Sorry, and Omega Men too.
Omega Men, yeah. So yeah, I was kind of in the Green Lantern universe there, and I mentioned that I was reading DC books way back when, before I really got into the superheroes. I was reading Julie Schwartz science fiction books, Strange Adventures, Mystery in Space. That was very much what I liked, and when you got to Julie restarting all of the old superheroes with this science fiction book, to me, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, was like a Julie Schwartz science fiction story that happened to be a superhero. So that's how I fit in with Green Lantern.
How did you get involved with Guy Gardner?
Once upon a time, Guy was a really boring supporting character in the regular Green Lantern books, and Steve Englehart, there he is again, was the writer on Green Lantern when I was there. And my understanding is that Guy had been written completely into a dead end, and there was nothing more that could be done with Guy Gardner. He was in a coma. He was kind of in a facility. It was a total turn-up, and the character was done. And Dick Giordano asked Steve Englehart, kind of as a favor to him, would he restart Guy Gardner? Would he come up with a new take on Guy Gardner? And Steve did. He came up with a completely different take on a superhero, certainly a completely different take on Guy Gardner, from a really bland gym coach to like a really pushy, belligerent, kind of one of the first superheroes with a bad attitude.
Right.
And I was given the shot to design Guy, and I designed him completely different from any Green Lantern who had come before. And this kind of belligerent attitude came through in his costume as well. That I think we started the idea of superheroes. Certainly the Green Lanterns. So many different costumes now, and we started that with Guy. So Guy was fun.
Yeah, he's kept that same style from when he was just Guy Gardner with the yellow ring. When he became a Green Lantern again, same green leather jacket and
funny boots
and haircut, and now they've really done quite a bit with him. I mean he's come like really far from what he was. I mean, he's been a Red Lantern, a Pink Lantern, and all that various other stuff. I mean, he's really quite an interesting character now.
Yeah, I have lost track of all the versions.
That was actually what. So I was just curious. I mean, if you'd kept up with some of the the goings on and not just that, but a lot of the stuff you'd worked on previously.
It's kind of amazing that to check in and see something you worked on or something you helped create, and that's what the character is now.
Yeah.
Well, I've been responsible for that myself. Chip was Green Lantern, the squirrel Green Lantern, and he was originally a squirrel. And I finished it with him. He was an animated character, so with a bow tie. So you never know somebody's going to take your character out and corrupt them.
Well, I mean, from a fan point of view, I mean, it's fantastic stuff, and I mean, the fact that they've been able to, like people like Jeff Johns have been able to basically take everything that has come before and incorporate it in some legitimate fashion that has bearing on the story, I think is great. So it says something for the work you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to jump now a little bit because he worked on another comic company that I'm a big fan of, and that's First Comics. You became art director there, I believe. Now, were you at First in the early 80s or a little later on?
I was at First from the very beginning.
Okay, here we go.
Wow.
I was actually involved with First before there was a First.
How did this all happen? Please tell me.
Well, Mike Gold was the PR guy at DC Comics for a while there. And he had an idea. He always wanted to have his own comics company. And for kind of a tryout, he was involved with a theater company in Chicago called Organic Theater, and for a premium, a giveaway, trying to get subscriptions, he recruited. There's Hulk wrote this. Wrote a story about people who are captured by a mad scientist and brought into the Organic Theater. And this was a tryout comic, a giveaway. A promotion, and Mike recruited me to work on that. I mean, we had worked well on some things at DC, and so he, I don't know I guess he thought I could do it. We did it, and that went along well. And it was only later that I found out that this was to have a comic book printed at Sparta, Illinois, like a Marvel and DC book, and it was just a kind of a dry run that to prove that people who weren't Marvel and DC could actually produce comic books. And I didn't quite catch that this is what was happening at the time. We did it, and it worked. And so when Mike got around to actually starting like a First Comics, and he had the connections to adapt the fantasy play Warp, which had actually been on Broadway. He used that as kind of the base of recruiting people and getting the company started. So we came in, proved we could do it, and he offered me being art director. I guess I was still on Green Lantern, but didn't seem like I was going to have too much direction on it right then. I don't remember what the problem is, but there was some objection to what I was doing at the time. But it seemed like it would be a lot of fun. It would be a challenge. It was kind of scary. We would be moving out to Chicago, so that was a new thing. But he recruited me. I came in as art director. I drew a book for the company, and like I have told many people many times, the main thing was that I proved that I had no managerial ability whatsoever. Somehow we always got the books out, but it was always kind of total chaos.
Now, were you in charge of hiring the talent to come in, or to look over just the submissions to see, okay, we think this person would work well with the company?
Yeah, I wasn't normally in charge of hiring them. I would go through what we saw, and I would pass it on to Mike with a good recommendation or not. And sometimes people would come to see us at cons.
Right.
Tim Truman showed up at a con with some samples, and we both looked at Tim's samples, and this guy would be, a good hire. And Mike brought in John Ostrander, who at the time was involved, wasn't with Organic, he was with the Steppenwolf company. And he thought John writing plays, working in plays, would be a good mesh for drawing comics. And that turned out to be a good call.
With Grimjack.
Grimjack, yes.
Yep. That was to say,
that was an amazing character, Grimjack. We loved Grimjack. And we knew there was going to be something unusual about Grimjack when Grimjack caught the little baby vampire, put him in the bathtub, and sawed his head off. So, that was different.
Yeah, I was going to say, you look at the roster of books that was going on there. You had Badger, you had John Sable, you had Nexus, Grimjack, Warp. I mean, these are books that, especially for me, I'm a big Badger guy. That pushed the limits as far as violence goes in certain aspects. I mean, were you comfortable with that coming from your background, or did you think maybe sometimes this is a little too much for a book?
Actually, I was definitely comfortable with it, especially with John Ostrander. That there was always, it might be horribly violent, but there was humor. That it wasn't like totally unpleasant. So John had something to balance things, and that always worked.
What did you think the first time you saw Steve Rude's art?
I've always been totally amazed by Steve Rude's art. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on a sort of different level.
It is, yes. His comics and just to see the commissions he posts, the paintings, it's amazing.
Now, when you were at first, did you guys consider yourself an independent book, or did you consider yourself, you know, competition for DC and Marvel? Like, we're going to get into your, you know, stream as well.
We actually considered ourselves as competition, mostly to DC. It was funny. We didn't have that much of a focus on Marvel, but there was always the idea that we could compete with DC.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, first when the books that came out, and you know how they were very high quality books too. You know, they weren't. It wasn't the same newspaper paper. It was a thicker paper, and they were just, you know, premium books that were out, you know, competing with the other books out there. And I always thought that really stood out about the line.
We had a very high quality of production. We had we experimented with some different ways of doing color separations, and this was before there was Photoshop, so we went through different processes. We got some good looking stuff.
Now, did you have any favorites there, or they're all your favorites?
They're all my children.
Well, I guess American Flag is my favorite of everything we did. I had never seen a book like Flag before, and I haven't seen one like Flag since then. And there was a level of creativity. Ken Brusenack was the letterer for Howard Chaykin, and Ken was allowed to develop a lot of the visual look with using different fonts and different ways of breaking down type. So it really it was almost like you could hear what was happening in Flag. So there was like that whole other level that I really have not seen another book that did that.
Do you think if American Flag or some of the other titles there were pitched to DC or pitched to Marvel, do you think they would have been picked up, or it had to be an independent book that would give them this opportunity?
Probably it had to be independent. There was, yeah. There's no reason Star Slayer couldn't have been a DC or Marvel book. It definitely could have been a Marvel. John Sable probably could have been a DC book, but it'd be hard to figure out what level of what corner of the DC universe that John Sable would fit into. But he was that kind of character.
Yeah, and Mike Grell's art on John Sable is some of my favorite. I mean, I just happen to love Mike Grell a lot too. But I remember my
again with the Mike Grell. Jesus, no.
Hey, folks, he's a fantastic artist. But I remember my cousin giving me Badger and John Sable when I was a kid, and I was like, you know, if it's not Marvel and DC, what do I care? And I'm reading these books, and I'm like, you know, comics can be something different than what I've read before. Like a lot more freedom in these books than I'd seen in the previous stuff.
Yeah, and you know, with John Sable, there was this whole you know, men's adventure sort of kind of like Wilbur Smith novels, that action in the jungle. A very cool take on an action character.
And you brought E-Man over to First too, right?
Eventually, yeah.
Okay. Was that a total? Did you see that as a reboot or a continuation from the Charlton?
It was. I've always seen E-Man as a continuation. Whenever he turns up again, he's the same character.
Mm-hmm. And was it good to have it back out, you know, on the market again?
I'm sorry.
Was it good to have E-Man back out there, you know, in the public again?
Yeah. I was actually when I signed up with Mike, I had an idea for a superhero I wanted to do who was not Eman, because I wanted to have a different identity from just being the guy who draws funny superheroes. Everybody else was kind of redefining themselves, but so I did some development work on a superhero, and Mike says, "Why are we going to this trouble? Everybody knows you do eman." So we got eman. I did eman. So still doing eman.
Any regrets about that, though? Honestly, like, do you really wish you were able to get that thing out, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's some regrets. I would have liked to have done something different, but if I'm going to do something that's not different, eman is good. So.
There you go.
So apparently in 2011, you started doing Dick Tracy, and
10 years ago.
Good Lord.
Amazing, isn't it?
That's really hard to believe. That's 10 years now. How is that? You're part of the creative team, as I believe, as it comes to Dick Tracy. Is that correct?
Right. Well,
so
I'm a penciler.
I would call that the creative team. What is that like in creating a Dick Tracy comic strip, and what is the turnaround time for that type of work?
Immediately is always the turnaround time.
Okay.
It's always late, and there's if Ramona Freighton told me if you take a week off, you're 4 weeks late. So I learned that to be true very quickly, and it's amazing that we have not missed any days with the strip. It's come very close sometimes, and we've managed to keep it on schedule, more or less. I've got a very good. We have a very good group on the strip, and Shelley Plager is the inker, letterer, editor of Last Resort, just the one we depend on. And if something goes wrong, Shelley generally comes in to fix it, to figure out how we can get through it. She designs a lot of the characters, actually, like Ricky Mortis, who is the sidekick of Abner Cadaver. B.O. Plenty, Gravel Gertie now has a sister, and Shelley designed the sister, who's a completely different character. So Shelley's somebody we depend on there. And Mike writes the scripts, and it's funny, Mike writes a little bit like Nick Cuddy did. It's little sketches, and kind of like thumbnails of everything, and doesn't type out scripts. So it's kind of back to an old way.
So that was our interview with Joe Staton. Pretty interesting, huh? What a really nice guy. So unassuming. Just an absolute pleasure to talk to. And the guy just has artwork laying around. How cool is that?
Yeah, I think if you're listening to this and you haven't seen the video, when he pulls out that original artwork, I nearly fainted. I was like, oh, my heavens, clutch my pearls. It was incredible. And to see what he had, the historic pieces like that, it was a dream come true.
I was definitely thrilled when I saw some artwork on this episode, and he just had it. It was just at hand, anybody might ask for it at any time. So very mild-mannered guy. Love to hear, him just kind of reminisce about some of the old projects, and just a, sort of a wonderful interview and wonderful episode. So as Oren said, if you are listening to this, you got to get yourself to our YouTube channel at Dollar Bin Bandits. However, if you just watch this and know the artwork I just referred to, just know that we do have a podcast, and it's on all podcast platforms. Search for Dollar Bin Bandits on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon, on everywhere. And hit us up. We are on email, if you've heard of that, dollarbinbandits@gmail.com. We are on social. Check us out on Facebook at Dollar Bin Bandits. Check us out on Instagram at Dollar Bin Bandits. Check us out, which is basically our comment section because we don't have one on the podcast, at Twitter. DB Bandits. I just messed that up. But you know what? It's all good because we just talked to Joe Staton and you just listened to it. So have yourselves a good week. We'll see you next week, guys.